Under the blood moon's unyielding gaze, a single drop of forbidden essence traced the curve of her throat, sealing fates that no howl could unravel. Elara stumbled through the frozen pines, her breath shattering against the night like fragile ice. The wind clawed at her fur-lined cloak, whispering accusations from the pack she had once called home. Rejection burned deeper than the winter's bite. It was the Alpha's decree, etched into her soul as surely as the scar across her palm. She was Omega, marked for weakness, cast out for a perceived betrayal that wasn't hers, a whispered rumor of disloyalty during the last hunt when famine had turned kin against kin. The pack's howl still echoed in her ears, not of sorrow, but of relief, as they sealed the borders of their territory with oaths to the goddess. The snow swallowed her footsteps, a vast white shroud under the crimson moon that hung low, bloated and watchful. It wasn't the silver light of renewal she knew from childhood tales. This was the blood moon, harbinger of curses and unions that defied the natural order. Elara's fingers trembled as she clutched the pendant at her neck, a crimson gem veined with silver inherited from her mother. It warmed against her skin, unnatural in the cold, pulsing like a second heartbeat. Blood calls to blood, her mother had said before the fever claimed her, but Elara had never understood until now, exiled into the wilds where wolves feared to tread. She collapsed against a jagged rock, the chill seeping through her boots, numbing her toes. Hunger gnawed at her belly, sharper than the grief. Why fight? The pack's verdict was final. She was tainted, unworthy of the moon's favor. Visions of the Alpha's cold eyes haunted her. His mate, the she-wolf of pure lineage, had sealed Elara's fate with a single venomous glance. No trial, no mercy. Just the shove into the storm, the gate slamming shut behind her. Freedom tasted like ash. The forest thickened here, ancient trees twisted like the spines of forgotten beasts. Elara rose, driven by instinct, her Omega senses heightened in solitude. The air carried a metallic tang, not the clean scent of pine, but something darker, copper and decay, laced with the faint rot of undeath. She froze, ears pricking at a distant rustle. Wolves didn't venture this far north. This was the borderlands, whispered to be haunted by shadows that drank the night. A low growl rumbled from the underbrush, not animal, but resonant, like thunder trapped in a throat. Elara's hand flew to the dagger at her belt, a pitiful relic from her days as pack scout. Her heart pounded, a frantic drum against her ribs. The pendant burned hotter, as if warning her or calling her forward. From the gloom emerged a figure, cloaked in midnight velvet that blended with the shadows. He moved with predatory grace, but his steps faltered, leaving a trail of dark droplets in the snow. Blood. Not wolf's blood, thick and vital, but thinner, colder, staining the white with inky red. His eyes caught the moonlight first, pale as frost, rimmed with crimson hunger. A vampire. The word slithered through her mind, forbidden lore from elders' tales of ancient wars between packs and the undead lords who ruled the shadowed citadels to the east. He collapsed to one knee mere paces away, his broad frame shuddering. Silver manacles bit into his wrists, etched with runes that glowed faintly, suppressing whatever dark power coursed through him. A king, she realized with a jolt. His bearing screamed royalty, even in ruin. The vampire king, Thorn Blackthorn, whispered in pack legends as the betrayer who had slain his own sire for a throne built on eternal night. But guilt shadowed his features, etching lines of torment across a face that might have been carved from marble. Elara's instincts warred, flee as every fiber of her being screamed or approach. Omegas were healers by nature, drawn to the broken, but this was no wounded pup. This was death incarnate, his scent a whirlwind of frostbitten roses and spilled wine. Yet the pendant thrummed in rhythm with his ragged breaths, an invisible thread pulling her closer. Who dares? His voice was velvet over gravel, laced with pain and command. He lifted his head, those eyes locking onto hers, piercing through the veil of fear. Recognition flickered, not personal but primal, a spark across species, wolf to vampire, omega to cursed sovereign. The blood moon above pulsed, casting their shadows long and entwined. She should have run. Instead, Alara stepped forward, the snow crunching under her weight. "Someone who knows exile," she whispered, her voice steady despite the terror coiling in her gut. The pendant's warmth spread through her chest, a forbidden beacon in the night. Thorn's lips curled in a bitter smile, fangs glinting. "Then you know mercy is a lie." But his gaze lingered, curiosity warring with the curse that bound him. The wind howled, carrying the distant clamor of pursuers, his own kind or hers. It mattered little. The borderlands offered no sanctuary. Alara knelt beside him, her hand hovering over the manacles. The air between them crackled, charged with the scent of impending storm. Blood from his wounds seeped into the snow, mingling with flakes that fell like tears from the crimson sky. In that moment, under the moon's judgmental eye, she felt the first stirrings of something ancient, a connection born not of desire, but of shared ruin. The pendant glowed faintly, its crimson heart reflecting the blood that bound them, a symbol of the night that would change everything. As the howls grew nearer, Alara made her choice. She pressed her palm to the rune, ignoring the burn, and whispered a prayer to the goddess. Mercy in the face of monsters. What was strength, if not that? The manacles cracked, and Thorn's eyes widened, a flicker of something human breaking through the eternal cold. The manacles shattered with a sound like breaking bone, shards of silver scattering into the snow like fallen stars poisoned by night. Thorn staggered to his feet, his pale skin gleaming under the blood moon's glow, veins pulsing with the rush of reclaimed power. Alara recoiled, the heat from the pendant searing her chest as if it had drunk the rune's magic. His eyes, those fathomless pools of crimson and frost, fixed on her with a hunger that was not mere thirst. It was the raw edge of astonishment, as though she'd handed him a mirror to his own fractured soul. "You fool," he rasped, his voice a silken blade. "You've just unchained oblivion." But there was no attack, no lunge for her throat. Instead, he extended a hand, gloved in shadowed leather, calloused from centuries of wielding scepters and swords. The air between them hummed, thick with the scent of his blood, ancient, metallic, laced with the faint spice of forbidden herbs that vampires use to stave off madness. Alara hesitated, her wolf instincts screaming to bare her teeth and flee, yet the pendant's pulse synced with her heartbeat, drawing her inexorably closer. Exile had stripped her of pack, of purpose. This stranger, this monster, offered a tether in the void. Distant howls pierced the night, not wolves, but something sharper, more guttural, the cries of his pursuers, vampire thralls, bound to a rival lord who coveted Thorn's throne. Betrayal's echo, she sensed it in the way his jaw tightened, guilt carving deeper lines into his immortal face. He had slain his sire, the legends whispered, not for power, but to end a tyranny that fed on innocence. Yet the crown weighed heavy, a curse of endless night where every decision dripped with blood. "We run," Alara said, surprising herself with the command in her tone. Her omega nature, once a chain, now fueled her resolve. She grabbed his arm, cold as winter stone, yet thrumming with restrained fury, and pulled him into the thicker pines. Snow whipped at their faces, the wind a howling chorus that masked their flight. Branches clawed like skeletal fingers, tearing at her cloak, but she pressed on, her senses guiding them toward a ravine she remembered from scout days, a narrow cleft in the mountain, veiled by ice falls. Thorn matched her pace, his longer strides silent, predatory. "Why?" he demanded between breaths that needed none, his voice cutting through the gale. "You owe me nothing. Your kind hunts mine like vermin." She glanced back, catching the flicker of pain in his eyes, the same shame that had shadowed her when the pack turned away. "Because the moon doesn't choose sides," she replied, though doubt gnawed at her. The pendant warmed again, its crimson core glowing faintly through her furs, as if affirming her words. Blood calls to blood. Was this the call? A wolf and a vampire, bound by rejection's cruel hand? They plunged into the ravine, the walls rising like the jaws of some ancient beast, slick with frozen melt. The howls faded, muffled by the roar of a hidden stream beneath the ice. Ilara led him to a cave mouth, half concealed by overhanging ledges, its entrance framed by icicles that wept in the crimson light. Inside, the air was still, heavy with the mineral tang of stone and the faint earthy rot of hibernation. Bears, perhaps, long gone to deeper slumbers. Thorn slumped against the wall, his cloak parting to reveal wounds that wept dark ichor, not healing as they should. The manacles had been no mere bonds, they were a ritual curse, sapping his essence. He tore at the remnants, fangs bared in frustration, but his hands trembled. Ilara's heart clenched. Empathy, unbidden, flooded her. She had bandaged packmates before, mending gashes from hunts. But this was different. Kneeling, she rummaged in her satchel for herbs, willow bark for pain, yarrow to staunch the unnatural flow. "Let me," she murmured, her voice soft against the cave's silence. He watched her, unblinking, as she pressed the poultice to his skin. The contact sent a jolt through her, cold fire, his flesh yielding like chilled velvet. Up close, his features were achingly beautiful, sculpted by an artist's hand in some forgotten epoch. High cheekbones, lips stained with the memory of blood, hair like raven wings falling across a brow etched with sorrow. Guilt, she saw it clearly now, the weight of a king who had lost more than a throne. "You touch death and expect to walk away unscathed," he said, but his tone held no threat, only weary curiosity. His gaze drifted to the pendant, nestled against her collarbone. "That, it sings to me. Old blood, wolf-tainted, but woven with something darker." Ilara's fingers stilled, her mother's heirloom passed down through generations of Omegas who had whispered of visions under the moon. "It's a guide," she confessed, the words tumbling out like confessions in the dim light. "For the lost, but I've never known what it truly means." The cave's chill seeped into her bones, yet proximity to him sparked warmth, a forbidden ember. Fear lingered, yes, the sharp points of his fangs, the way his eyes darkened with unspoken hungers, but curiosity bloomed beside it, petals unfurling in barren soil. Thorn reached out, his fingers brushing the gem. The touch was electric, a shared vision flashing unbidden. A night of passion under that same blood moon. Bodies entwined in defiance, a spark of life conceived in the impossible union. Ilara gasped, pulling away, cheeks flushing with heat that had nothing to do with the cave's draft. He withdrew, expression haunted. "The curse. It twists fates. I fled my citadel to spare them my rot, but now—" His voice trailed, the weight of duty crashing like distant thunder. Outside, the wind moaned, carrying the faint scent of smoke. Pursuers lighting torches? They were bound now, by necessity, if not choice. Ilara bandaged the last wound, her hands steady despite the storm within. Empathy stirred, transforming fear into a fragile thread. In this refuge of ice and shadow, under the moon's watchful eye, she saw not just a monster, but a soul adrift, much like her own. The pendant pulsed, its light casting crimson reflections on the walls, a symbol of the blood that might yet unite or destroy them. As silence settled, broken only by their breaths, hers ragged, his unnecessary, Ilara met his gaze. "What haunts a king into chains?" she asked, the question hanging like mist. Thorn's lips curved faintly, a ghost of a smile. "The same that exiles an Omega, the fear of what we might become." The cave held its breath, the first bonds of refuge weaving tighter, even as danger circled beyond. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. The cave's shadows clung like velvet drapes, heavy with the scent of damp stone and the faint, coppery tang of Thorn's wounds. Ilara sat cross-legged on the uneven floor, her back against the rough wall, watching the vampire king as he paced the narrow confines. His movements were a study in restrained fury, silent, fluid, like smoke uncoiling from a dying fire. The blood moon filtered through the ice-veiled entrance, casting elongated crimson streaks across his form, turning his pale skin to burnished garnet. She pulled her cloak tighter, the chill seeping deeper now that the adrenaline of flight had ebbed, leaving only the raw ache of isolation and the inexplicable pull toward this creature of night. Thorn paused, his gaze drifting to the pendant once more, its glow a subdued ember against her throat. "That vision," he murmured, voice low and threaded with unease. "It wasn't mere fancy. The curse on my bloodline. It forges bonds that defy reason, unions that birth abominations." He turned away, shoulders tensing beneath the tattered velvet of his cloak, as if the words themselves were chains he couldn't shatter. Ilara's pulse quickened, the memory of that flash, bodies tangled in moonlit frenzy, a spark of life igniting in the impossible, still burning behind her eyes. It wasn't desire that had stirred her then, but a profound, visceral recognition, the loneliness of the exiled mirrored in his eternal solitude. She shifted, the snow-dusted hem of her cloak whispering against the stone. "Abominations?" The word tasted bitter, like the ash of her own rejection. Omegas were deemed weak, tainted by the pack's rigid hierarchies, but to be called monster? Her fingers traced the pendant's edge, its warmth a counterpoint to the cave's frost. It had guided her mother through visions of lost paths, whispers from the goddess that revealed hidden truths. But this was no mere guidance. The gem pulsed faintly, sinking with the distant drip of melting ice, as if awakening to the blood that now stained the air between them. Thorn knelt before a small pile of gathered twigs, remnants from her satchel, scavenged during their flight, and struck a flint from his belt. Sparks flew, reluctant in the damp, but soon a modest fire crackled to life, its golden tongues licking at the shadows. The warmth was a fragile mercy, chasing the numbness from her limbs, though it did little for the knot of fear and curiosity twisting in her chest. He sat across from her, the flames dancing in his crimson-rimmed eyes, illuminating the faint scars that marred his neck, marks of silver bites, perhaps from his own kind's rituals of allegiance or betrayal. Guilt etched his features deeper in the firelight. She saw it in the way his jaw clenched, as if every century of rule had carved a fresh wound. "I was not always this," he said, unprompted, his voice a rumble like thunder echoing in a hollow chest. "Born to shadows, yes, but the throne demanded sacrifices. My sire." He feasted on the living without remorse, turning allies to thralls, packs to dust. "I ended him to spare the world his hunger, but the crown twisted me in turn. Now, my blood curses any who draw near. Visions of doom, children that unravel empires." His gaze met hers, piercing, not with hunger, but with a raw vulnerability that made her breath catch. The fire popped, sending embers spiraling upward, mirrors to the sparks of empathy igniting within her. Ilara leaned forward, the heat kissing her face, mingling with the flush of unspoken questions. Her Omega instincts, once subdued by pack scorn, surged now. A healer's call to mend what was broken, even if it courted ruin. And me? What curse do I carry that the moon would bind us? The pendant flared suddenly. Hotter than the fire, its crimson light blooming like spilled blood across her skin. She gasped, clutching it, as a wave of sensation crashed over her. Not pain, but clarity. Visions unfurled in her mind's eye. Fleeting images of a child, eyes like fractured moonlight, one hand tipped with claws, the other with fangs. A bridge between worlds, or a harbinger of war. The air thickened, charged with the scent of frostbitten roses and wild earth, her wolf essence intertwining with his undead chill. Thorn's eyes widened, his body going still as stone. "You see it too," he whispered, rising to his knees, the fire's glow turning his silhouette into a specter of ancient tragedy. He reached out, hesitating, then cupped her hand around the pendant. The contact was a storm, cold lightning meeting her warmth, their shared vision deepening. They saw the child not as abstract horror, but as a force, tiny fingers grasping at shadows, cries that echoed with howls and hisses, a destiny that could shatter the fragile peace between wolves and vampires. Alara's heart thundered, terror and awe warring within her. This was her hidden gift manifesting. The Pathfinder's blood in her veins awakening under the blood moon's gaze, a revelation that she was no mere exile, but a conduit for fates long entwined. She pulled away, the vision shattering like thin ice, leaving her trembling. "This can't be real," she breathed, though the pendant's afterglow lingered, painting the cave walls in veins of red. Outside, the wind howled sharper, carrying the acrid bite of smoke, torches closing in, pursuers, relentless, drawn by the snapped curse or the moon's crimson call. Thorn's expression darkened, the king resurfacing amid the vulnerability, but his hand lingered near hers, a silent plea amid the duty that bound him. "What is strength?" Alara murmured, echoing the philosophies her mother had whispered under silver moons. "If not facing the blood we cannot unspill?" The fire dimmed, as if in reverence, and in that moment, denial cracked. The connection, once instinctual fear, now wove deeper, rationalized as survival, resisted as folly, yet undeniable. The pendant cooled, its light fading to a watchful pulse, symbol of the revelation that bound them. A child conceived in forbidden night, poised to end or redeem them all. But as the distant clamor grew, boots crunching snow, guttural commands slicing the gale, Alara rose, dagger in hand, her resolve hardening like forged steel. Thorn stood beside her, fangs bared not in threat, but alliance. The cave, their fragile refuge, trembled on the edge of Revelation's storm, where empathy bloomed into something perilously close to fate. In the fire's dying light, she wondered, could mercy heal what destiny sought to destroy? The moon watched, silent judge, as the night pressed in. The intruders breached the ravine like specters summoned from the blood moon's underbelly, their torches flaring against the night in jagged arcs of orange fury. Alara pressed her back to the cave's icy wall, the dagger's hilt slick in her palm, its weight a meager anchor against the tide of what she'd seen. The vision lingered, not as fleeting dream, but etched into her marrow. The child, a fragile storm of fur and fang, eyes gleaming with the fractured light of two worlds colliding. Her hidden gift, the Pathfinder's blood, whispered in Omega lore as a seer's curse, had awakened fully now, unbidden and unrelenting, pulling truths from the ether like threads from a loom of fate. Thorn moved before her, a shadow uncoiling into lethal grace, his body blocking the entrance as if he could will the stone to swallow them whole. The fire's embers hissed in protest, casting his silhouette in flickering crimson, the scars on his neck pulsing faintly with the resurgence of his power. "Stay behind me," he growled. The command laced not with royal decree, but a king's quiet desperation, the guilt in his eyes a mirror to her own unraveling resolve. She nodded, though her wolf senses sharpened, mapping the intruder's sense. 5 vampires, lesser lords bound to his rival, their auras reeking of ambition and stale blood, drawn by the snapped curse like moths to a poisoned flame. The first assailant lunged through the ice-veiled mouth, fangs extended in a snarl that echoed off the walls, his cloak billowing like raven wings. Thorn met him mid-air, a blur of pale fury, his hands clamping around the intruder's throat with a crack that reverberated like thunder in the confined space. Blood sprayed, dark, viscous, splattering the stone in abstract patterns that caught the torchlight outside, turning the cave into a canvas of visceral prophecy. Alara's breath hitched, the metallic tang flooding her nostrils, mingling with the pendant's insistent warmth. It burned now, not just against her skin, but deeper, igniting the gift within her like dry tinder kissed by lunar fire. Another attacker followed, this one wielding a silver-laced whip that sang through the air, its tip aimed for Thorn's back. Alara acted on instinct, the Pathfinder surging forth, time slowed, the world fracturing into crystalline moments. She saw the whip's arc before it fell, the intruder's intent a glowing thread in her mind's eye, betrayal born of envy, a plot to claim the throne by chaining the king anew. Left, she cried, her voice cutting the chaos like a blade. Thorn twisted, impossibly fluid, catching the whip mid-strike and yanking the vampire forward into a fatal embrace. Fangs met flesh, a guttural tear, and the foe crumpled, his torch guttering out in a pool of his own essence. The skirmish blurred into a symphony of violence, grunts and clashes, the wet rip of sinew, the acrid smoke of dying flames. Alara dodged a lunging shadow, her dagger finding purchase in an arm that reached too far, drawing a hiss of pain. But it was the visions that overwhelmed her now, cascading without mercy, the gift manifesting in full, a torrent of revelations that peeled back the night's veil. She saw Thorn's past unspool, the slaying of his sire under a similar blood moon. Not ambition, but a moral reckoning, the old king's feasts leaving villages as husks, packs scattered like leaves in eternal winter. Guilt had forged his chains, self-imposed exile from his citadel to prevent the curse's spread, a king's sacrifice rationalized as duty, resisted as weakness, and woven through it all, her role, the Omega exile, bearer of the pendant's bloodline, key to unraveling the curse that twisted his immortality into torment. The child they would conceive, not abomination, but redeemer, a hybrid whose cries could bridge the chasm between wolves and vampires, ending the ancient wars that bled the land dry. The pendant blazed, its crimson gem projecting faint illusions onto the cave walls, silhouettes of a babe's first steps on snow-kissed earth, howls harmonizing with nocturnal whispers, a throne not of iron, but woven from mercy's thread. Alara staggered, the weight of it crashing like an avalanche, her emotions a whirlwind, terror at the intimacy it demanded, awe at the destiny it revealed, a budding acceptance that resisted the pull of her solitary wolf heart. Thorn dispatched the last intruder with a savage twist, his chest heaving, though lungs knew no strain, dark blood streaking his face like war paint under the moon's glow filtering through the frayed entrance. He turned to her, eyes wide with the shock of realization, the visions shared in that electric moment binding them tighter than any oath. You're the seer, he breathed, stepping closer, the cave's chill yielding to the heat of his gaze. The Pathfinder of legends, the one who charts paths through blood and shadow. My curse foresaw this, a union to break the cycle, a child to heal what I've shattered. His voice cracked, the melancholic king surfacing amid the gore, guilt yielding to a fragile hope. He reached for her, not to claim, but to steady, his cold fingers brushing hers, sending sparks of forbidden warmth through her veins. Alara met his touch, the dagger forgotten at her feet, the pendant's light syncing with their pulses, hers vital and wild, his eternal and shadowed. The air hummed with the aftermath, dripping ichor, smoldering embers, the distant wind mourning the fallen. Outside, the blood moon hung heavier, its crimson light bathing the ravine in a baptism of fate. She felt the gift settle, no longer a curse, but a mantle, revealing her as more than rejected Omega, the key to his redemption, the bridge to a renascent world. Yet doubt lingered, a thorn in the bloom. Could she choose this path, surrender her hard-won solitude for a love born of lunar decree? The cave, slick with battle's residue, held its breath, the symbols of their union, blood, fire, moon, converging in silent testament. Thorn's expression softened, the weight of centuries lifting fractionally in her presence. "I've run from this truth for eons," he confessed, his thumb tracing the pendant's edge. "But you've illuminated it. What is destiny, if not the mercy we extend to our own ruins?" Alara's heart ached with the poetry of it, the romantic tragedy unfolding in the gore-strewn sanctuary. Empathy had forged their bond, now revelation tempered it into steel. As the night deepened, pursuers vanquished, but greater threats looming in the citadel's intrigue and her pack's vengeful borders, she whispered. "Then let us walk the path it reveals." The pendant dimmed, watchful, as the first stirrings of acceptance took root amid the pain. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The ravine's mouth yawned wider under the blood moon's descent, its crimson veil thinning to reveal a sky bruised with the promise of dawn's betrayal. Alara's words hung in the cave's blood-slicked air like a vow etched in frost, but the night offered no respite. Thorn's hand lingered on hers, cold and unyielding, a tether forged in the forge of shared visions, yet the weight of revelation pressed heavier now, stirring the ghosts of her past from their snowy graves. The pendant at her throat cooled to a watchful ember, its crimson pulse a reminder of the child that bound them, a fragile thread between worlds, or a noose tightening with every heartbeat. They emerged from the cave as one, shadows merging in the pre-dawn hush, the snow underfoot crunching like brittle bones. Thorn's wounds had knit in the hours of quiet alliance, his immortal essence reclaiming its edge, but the guilt in his eyes remained, a perpetual scar deeper than silver. Ilara's senses, sharpened by the Pathfinder's awakening, mapped the threats converging. The acrid bite of wolf musk from the west, her pack's border patrol closing in with vengeful precision. From the east, the metallic rot of vampire scouts, loyal to the rival lord who had orchestrated Thorn's chaining. Betrayal's web, spun long before their meeting, now ensnared them both. The pack's rumor of her disloyalty, a lie seeded by a traitorous elder, jealous of her mother's pendant and its seer's power. Thorn's curse, amplified by his brother's ambition, a throne coveted through whispers of the king's weakening rule. The wind rose, carrying weavos that twisted into snarls, the pack's howls laced with the fury of the alpha she had once served. Ilara's chest tightened, the scar on her palm throbbing as if freshly carved, a mark of the oath she had broken not by choice, but by exile's cruel decree. They crested a ridge, the pines parting to reveal the confrontation. Her former kin, furred and feral under torchlight, led by the Alpha's Beta, a hulking wolf with eyes like molten iron, the very one who had spread the lies to claim her scouting role. Flanking them, ethereal in the gloom, stood the vampire contingent, cloaked figures with eyes glowing like banked coals, their lord's emissary at the fore, a sleek noble named Vesper, Thorn's half-brother, whose smile was a blade sheathed in silk. "Traitor Omega," the Beta growled, his voice a rumble that shook the snow from branches, his pack fanning out in a semicircle of bared fangs and rippling muscle. "You flee with the undead scourge. The goddess weeps for your fall." Ilara's blood sang with the insult, the rejection's wound reopening like a gash in fresh flesh, the cold seeping into her bones as memories flooded. The shove into the storm, the gate's slam, the howls of relief that had shattered her spirit. Yet the pendant warmed, its light piercing the folds of her cloak, illuminating the truth her gift now unveiled, the beta's envy, a moral rot that had poisoned the pack for his gain, turning famine's desperation into scapegoat's blood. Thorn stepped forward, his presence a wall of shadowed authority, the air around him thickening with the scent of frostbitten roses and ancient power. "She is no traitor," he intoned, voice like velvet over gravel, fangs glinting in the torchlight. "And you tread on borders that will drown in night if you persist." Vesper laughed, a sound like shattering crystal, his lithe form uncoiling as he gestured to his thralls. "Brother, your chains may be broken, but your folly binds you still. This wolf witch, her blood will fuel the curse you flee, the child you both envision, a mongrel to topple thrones." His eyes flicked to Alara, hunger and disdain mingling, revealing the deeper betrayal. Vesper's hand in the original curse, amplifying it to force Thorn's abdication, all for a crown untainted by guilt. The clash erupted without mercy, a whirlwind of claw and fang under the moon's fading crimson gaze. Alara dodged the beta's lunge, her body moving with the Pathfinder's clarity. Visions flashing, paths of strike and parry, the weak joints in his flank exposed like veins on marble. She countered, dagger slicing fur and drawing hot blood that steamed on the snow, the metallic warmth a visceral echo of her own spilled tears in exile. Thorn blurred through the vampires, a tempest of lethal grace, his hands wrenching limbs with the crack of thunder, ichor spraying in arcs that painted the white ground red. But it was the emotional fray that tore at her soul. The beta's snarl twisted into accusation. "You were always weak, Omega, fit only for banishment." Stirring the shame she had buried, the pack's rejection a mirror to Thorn's self-imposed isolation. Vesper circled Thorn, whip uncoiling like a serpent, its silver tip whistling. "Forgive me, king, or fall to war eternal," he taunted, but the words masked desperation, the rival's fear of the child, a hybrid whose power could unite the fractured realms, ending the wars that fed his ambition. Alara's gift surged again, revealing the choice's crux. Strike Vesper down and ignite vampire civil strife, dooming innocence to endless night. Spare him, and risk the pack's wrath turning on her as the bridge to monsters. Freedom whispered, flee alone, reclaim her solitary wilds, leave Thorn to his cursed throne. Or love, in its redemptive fire, forgive the betrayers, weave mercy into the blood moon's legacy, birth a destiny that healed through sacrifice. Thorn faltered under Vesper's lash, the silver burning renewed chains into his flesh, guilt flashing in his eyes, the moral weight of kinslaying haunting him anew. Alara intervened, the pendant blazing as she hurled herself between them, her cry a howl that echoed with lunar command. "Enough!" The word rippled outward, her gift manifesting as a pulse of silver light, freezing the fray in a tableau of suspended fury. Visions cascaded, forgiveness as the path to renaissance, war as the chain that bound them all. The beta whimpered, truths unveiled in his mind, the lies crumbling like hoarfrost. Vesper recoiled, ambition's illusion shattering against the child's prophesied light. She faced them, heart pounding with the storm of choice, the wind whipping her hair like a banner of defiance. Thorn rose beside her, his hand finding hers, cold strength bolstering her warmth. "What is power?" she whispered, voice steady amid the ethical tempest, "if not the mercy to rewrite our ruins?" The pack shifted uneasily, the vampires hissing retreat, but the dilemma lingered, a spiritual precipice. Love demanded they confront the past, not with blades, but with the forgiveness that could crown or consume them. The blood moon dipped lower, casting long shadows that entwined like fates, the pendants glow a beacon in the gathering gray. Alara's soul trembled on the edge, freedom's lonely howl, or the redemptive union that might end them all. The night held its breath, the choice a blade poised at dawn's throat. The blood moon surrendered to the first frail fingers of dawn, its crimson light bleeding into a sky of fractured pearl, as if the night itself wept for the choices unfolding on the ridge. Alara stood at the precipice, her hand clasped in Thorn's unyielding grip, the pendant's glow a defiant heartbeat against the gathering gray. The frozen tableau before them, wolves mid-snarl, vampires poised in lethal arcs, held like a breath caught in the goddess's throat, her pathfinder gift weaving the air into threads of revelation. She felt it all, the beta's crumbling facade, envy dissolving into shame like snow under sun. Vesper's ambition fracturing, his eyes widening not with fury, but the dawning horror of his own isolation, a mirror to the betrayals that had chained his brother. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the faint, salty tang of impending tears, hers or the earth's, she couldn't tell. Rejection's scar on her palm throbbed, a reminder of the pack's cold decree, the gate's slam echoing in her soul like a final howl. Yet here, amid the blood-streaked snow and the metallic reek of spilled ichor, freedom beckoned not as solitary flight into the wilds, but as a deeper liberation, the mercy to forgive, to choose union over the war that would devour them all. Thorn's touch anchored her, his cold seeping into her warmth like frost-kissing flame, a union of opposites that the vision had foretold. The child, their child, stirred in that shared prophecy, not as destroyer, but as dawn's fragile promise, a hybrid soul to mend the rifts of ancient enmity. "What is destiny?" Alara murmured, her voice a silken thread cutting the hush. "If not the freedom to heal what blood has torn?" The words released her gift's hold, the figures unfreezing in slow motion, weapons lowering as truths rippled outward like waves on a frozen lake. The beta collapsed to his knees, furred form shuddering, his molten eyes meeting hers with raw contrition. We were blind," he rasped. The pack's howls fading into whimpers of regret, the famine's desperation unveiled as the true poison, not her imagined betrayal. Vesper staggered back, his whip coiling limp at his side, the rival lord's silk-clad poise cracking to reveal a brother haunted by the same guilt that shadowed Thorn, the fear of becoming the monster their sire had been. Thorn stepped forward, releasing her hand only to extend it toward Vesper, palm open in a gesture older than Throne's. "Brother," he said, voice resonant with the melancholy of centuries, "the crown is no prize if it demands our souls. Join us or walk your shadowed path alone." The air hummed with the weight of it, the vampire's eyes flickering between defiance and surrender. For a heartbeat, war loomed, silver lashes and ripping fangs, the ridge a battlefield of red upon white. But Vesper bowed his head, the emissaries' thralls dispersing like mist, their scents retreating into the east. "Mercy from the fallen king," he whispered, turning away not in defeat, but in the first stirrings of redemption's call. The pack followed suit, the beta rising with a low whine of submission, his kin circling closer not in threat, but alliance, their eyes reflecting the pendant's crimson light as if seeing her anew, not as tainted Omega, but as the seer who charted paths through despair. Alara's heart swelled, a tide of rebirth washing away the exile's ash, though tears traced hot paths down her cheeks, salting the snow at her feet. The wind softened, Weavos distant now, harmonizing with the nocturnal hush of retreating shadows. Thorn turned to her, his face illuminated by the dawn's tentative gold, the scars on his neck fading like old ink under light. Guilt lingered in his gaze, but softened by faith, the ethical king yielding to the lover's quiet strength. In that moment, under the moon's fading vigil, they chose. Not sacrifice in blood, but in vulnerability. The union that would birth their child, a cure woven from love's redemptive fire. Elara leaned into him, her head against his chest where no heart beat yet stirred with possibility, the pendant pressing between them like a seal on fate. Visions cascaded one final time, gentle now, not storm, but serenity. The babe's cries echoing through a citadel thawed by wolf song, packs and vampires gathering under a silver moon, borders dissolving into shared hearths. The child's eyes, fractured moonlight, would heal the wounds of rejection and betrayal, proving love not as reward, but as the proof of souls remade. They descended the ridge together, the snow yielding softer under their steps, the pines parting like sentinels bowing to renascence. The pendant cooled to a steady warmth, its crimson veins pulsing in rhythm with her quickening life, the forbidden night already conceiving what would end the old world's chains. Thorn's arm encircled her waist, a vow unspoken, his breath, unnecessary yet tender, ghosting her ear. "You have redeemed me," he whispered, the words a philosophy etched in frost. Strength as mercy, power as compassion, destiny embraced over despair's howl. As dawn broke fully, gilding the frozen world in hues of ancient gold, Elara felt the rebirth settle deep. A queen in exile no more, but architect of a legacy born from pain. The blood moon's echo lingered in the sky, a poetic scar, reminding them that every wound could bloom into flame. In the distance, a single uivo rose, not of loss, but triumph, the wind carrying it like a blessing from the goddess. They walked on, bound by blood and choice, the child within her a spark of eternal light, healing what the night had torn asunder. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.